Well, thanks. Wow. You know, I'd forgotten my dad had worked in every single one of the programs all the way through the space station program. That was good to hear. I do have some things I'm going to talk about on manned spaceflight in general. And I have a few pictures like this that I'm going to show you. But I'm really here to talk about leadership in mission control, and in particular, how we raise our folks to lead when things aren't going well. What it looks like in mission control when things are going well, which is a pretty chaotic and crisis-like time anyway. And then what does that mean to us in managing the corporation? And I'll describe all of that. Before I do, I'm gonna walk through some pictures. Well, actually, I have some video that will give you a view that most of the public has not seen, up close and personal, both of the spacecraft itself during the early part of the shuttle launch, as well as what life looks like in mission control during a shuttle launch. So let me start with the first video. Not only are we seeing temperatures like that and we're in a vacuum, but we've got little pieces of rock whizzing by, little micrometeoroids, little pieces of asteroids. Some of them are traveling faster than we are, and some of them are going the other way. So it's like dodging bullets. We also have a bunch of old spacecraft, old satellites that are falling apart and dropping down through orbit, and we're having to dodge all of those as if being in that vacuum and those types of temperatures wasn't bad enough. And then when we get up there, we're now going to fly our space shuttle up to a space station that weighs about 1 million pounds, also traveling 17,500 miles an hour. We're going to fly up in front of it as if that's the place you want to be, and then we're going to try to dock without breaking the space station and ideally without breaking the space shuttle. And we're going to try to do that at about 1/10 of a foot per second. And while we're doing it, we're going to try real hard to not let the rockets on the shuttle that we use to move it around blow off solar rays, radiators, and other things that are sticking out from the outside of the space station. And then further, when we get there, we're going to use the space shuttle and the space station robot arm. Two robot arms that on the ground are so flimsy they can't hold up their own weight. But in orbit, we can pull 20, 30, 40,000 pounds of equipment out of the back of the shuttle and plug it into the space station. Or if it was a satellite, put it out in the sky and let go of it and deploy it into space. For space station missions, after we attach this 30,000-pound thing to the outside of the spacecraft, we're then going to send two of our friends outside in spacesuits that are about this thick, where they're now going to bolt that thing on, connect up electrical wires, connect up cooling tubes, and allow us to now turn on this brand spanking new piece of space station that we just spent all this trouble putting into space. Then we're going to put them back in the orbiter and they're going to land. And when they land, half a world away, we're going to burn a little bitty burn where we'll slow them down just a few hundred miles an hour, but it will be just enough to drop them into the atmosphere that will now create a 6,000 degree Fahrenheit ball of fire around the outside of the shuttle, which will be sort of like sticking your hand out the window of your car when you're going down the highway. And that drag will be just enough to pull the shuttle the rest of the way down into the atmosphere. So it took us about 10 minutes of riding on that 7.5 million pounds of fire to put them into orbit. In 20 minutes of that 6,000 degree Fahrenheit fire around the outside, we will slow them down enough that they'll make a pinpoint landing at the end of the runway half a world away. And just as a reminder, the shuttle's a great big glider. So if we get it wrong, there's no do-overs. You're going to land wherever we just decided we were going to land and where we burned to land. We have a little bit of flexibility to fly around, but not much. You better make sure you do this right. And all of that I just described, those are the good days. That's when everything works the way it's supposed to be. That's normal or a normal life in manned spaceflight. Now, the next video I'm going to show you will be what a different day would look like inside mission control. Now, it's a practice day. It's a simulation run. But it will give you an idea of why we make spaceflight look as easy as we've made it look for, if not the entire 50 years we've been doing it, certainly the last 30 years of the Space Shuttle program, last 15 years that we've been flying the space station. For those days when it's not a good day, then our real focus inside the mission control world, this organization that I'm responsible for, isn't about the rocket science. It's how do we raise our people to be effective leaders? What is the culture of our organization? How do we know we can trust the people you're going to see in the next video to always be right and always do the right thing? And most of what I'm going to talk about is going to be on that very subject and how it applies inside mission control. But then more importantly, when you come out of mission control, how it allows us to do some other amazing things outside of mission control. And they're all the same phenomena, and they're all usable outside of the aerospace industry. So first, MOD leadership. Our leadership environment, the culture of my organization that comprises mission control, it has always been tied directly to this crazy job that we do. Throughout our history, we've been responsible for all aspects of planning the missions, training the astronauts, and running mission control, flying the spaceship through things that you just saw. It doesn't take much error in that kind of day in order for our folks to do something that costs us a mission, that could cost us $500 million to replace, cost us a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft that we likely cannot afford to replace, or worse, cost us the lives of our friends. So in that kind of environment, with those stakes in play, the leadership, the trust of our people on console, knowing that they will always do the right thing, has a significant premium, which is why we talk so much inside my organization about this very thing, and why you're going to hear me talk a lot about that and not about rocket science tonight. In a nutshell, leadership and mission control is about three things. It's about technical truth, integrity, and courage. And we indoctrinate that, if you will, into our folks at the earliest working level. We absolutely make sure that our management team understands it, and we select our most senior managers from the folks that both get that and are able to do the rocket science while standing at the board showing their work. The technical truth piece, this really just means we expect our people to always be trying to find the actual explanation for anything that we're seeing. We have to understand the science. It's not enough to shoot from the hip. It's not enough to have made a decision on one flight and we got away with it, so we'll just keep making that decision on the following flights. We want to have the data. We want to know that we were right, and we want to know why that we're right every time. The hazard in a dangerous business like ours is if you do something scary and you get away with it, you'll keep on doing it, because if you got away with it, you must have been right. Or worse, because you got away with it, the next time you have to argue that same scenario, you win the day because you were right last time. And what we expect from our folks is don't rely on that. Winning the day doesn't actually do it for the astronauts that climb on the board of one of those spacecraft and are trusting us to keep them alive. They're expecting that our guys are always right, not that our guys always win the argument. And that's the integrity part of our leadership model. Our expectation is that our people will be the ones to realize if say, we are disagreeing with another technical organization in NASA on some next decision. If our folks realize that they have data that we didn't have, that we made a mistake in our calculations, or for whatever reason, the other team's answer is better than ours, our expectation is our workforce inside Mission Control comes forward and recognizes that. That's what we are rating our people on. It's being right, not always being the first ones to get the right answer. And then the courage piece of that leadership model, that really is having the willingness to stand up in front of somebody like me, who is a veteran of running Mission Control, or some of our heroes like Gene Kranz, the fellow that Ed Harris plays in the Apollo 13 movie. When people like that are sitting around the table and one of our more junior engineers thinks that veteran, that guy that's one of our heroes, is wrong about something, that takes real courage. Or, as you're about to see in the next video, when everybody in the control room is listening to everything that you say as you are doing your work in public, and the management outside in the rest of the buildings in Johnson Space Center are listening to every call and everything that you do, it takes real courage to weigh in and make a difference. So now, this is inside the Space Shuttle control room. This was about 3 flights before the last shuttle flight. So this would be circa late 2010, early 2011. This is the real shuttle control room, and all of these people are veteran shuttle flight controllers. Each one of them is an expert at what they talk about. There will be a fellow in the back of the room with silver hair. He's the flight director. He's the guy that's in charge. He's the white vest guy that Ed Harris portrayed in Apollo 13. Incidentally, he's the son of one of the original Apollo flight directors named Glenn Lunny, who was the flight director that was on console during Apollo 13 when the oxygen tanks blew up. And it was Glenn Lunny's leadership that saved the day and kept that spacecraft and that crew alive long enough for Gene Kranz and his team to come in and then figure out how we would get those folks back. So with that, we're going to look over their shoulders and we're going to listen as Brian Lunny leads his team through an ascent. Now this ascent, like I said, is not necessarily a good day.
Gulf Command at Mila.
Atlantis, comm check.
Loud and clear, Houston.
And we've got you the same. And Brew, because of a equipment failure at Zaragoza, we're going to select Marone as the primary. You can expect the Istris at Crest.
Okay, we'll select Marone at this time.
PLT OTC, clear caution and warning memory and verify no unexpected errors.
Action work. Action warning memory clear, no unexpected errors.
OTC copies. Atlantis OTC, close and lock your visors and initiate O2 flow.
Atlantis copies and work.
Bodycom visors down, good O2 flow. Copy.
Flight booster, 3 engines ready.
Copy, 3 ready.
All vents open.
Copy, vents.
Liftoff confirmed.
Copy, liftoff.
Houston, Atlantis, roll program.
Roger, roll.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Guidance roll.
Copy.
Throttle down, 3 at 72.
Copy.
Throttle up, 3 at 104.
Go with throttle up.
Atlantis, go with throttle up.
Atlantis, go at throttle up.
Eagle.
In Flight Eagle, we just lost main Bravo APC 5 bus. There's no bus loss action. Just to note, do not isolate MBS helium on the left.
Booster
concurs.
concurs. All right, Capcom, let them know APC 5.
Atlantis for Butch, you've had a main B APC 5 failure, no action at this point other than do not isolate any main engine, left main engine helium leaks.
Quick copy, folks.
By GNC?
Go.
The RGA message was due to the bus. We can deselect RGA 2 in the backup when able.
Get it after staging.
Flight booster.
Go.
You see 3 flow control valves open with falling disconnect pressure, or with falling LH pressure. On panel R2, LH2, LH press switch to open.
Copy.
Atlantis for Butch on panel R2, LH2, LH press switch to open.
So booster, we're looking at
5-2, all express.
possible ullage leak here.
Affirm flight, S3 SEP.
Good readback.
Copy, SEP. Okay, Capcom, let's tell them we're evaluating a potential ullage leak and ask them to deselect RGA number 2 in the backup.
And Atlantis, you took the LH press switch open for a potential ullage leak. We're monitoring at this time. Also, Brew, you can deselect RGA 2 in the backup.
Brake flight prop, left domes, helium press, Bravo to open.
Left domes, helium press, Bravo to open.
2 engine maroon.
Copy.
Left domes, helium press, Bravo's open.
Copy. 2 engine maroon.
Prop, did you get your pressure?
Affirmative flight. It was in blowdown. They're taking the Bravo to open. Got it.
Flight booster.
Go.
Switch was no joy. At this time, limits inhibit, hard enable. We have met the definition of an ullage leak. It's looking like a TAL.
Okay, do you have an estimate of when you're going to meet your tank pressures?
We should be getting messages shortly. The first engine to 3.0 is predicted 7 plus 1.5, but it is walking in. We'll continue to evaluate.
Flight pilot, let's go ahead and select Istris on board to get the in-plane tail set.
Okay. Select Istris and guidance Fido, you copy?
Atlantis,
Copies, and just a reminder that 7 minutes for the first engine out time is our threshold between ECAL and TAL.
Copy.
Flight Inco.
Atlantis, limits inhibit, hard enable.
Inhibit, hard enable.
Let's see. So, Fido, we're looking at an abort either way.
Right. We're going to need to get
eco or TAL.
dump going, so might as well go item 9 plus 74.
Okay. So we'll take the item 9 plus 74. We're going to not make it uphill at this one. We're just trying to figure out which way we're going.
And we're negative return.
Get the dump going.
Atlantis, you are negative return. And for Butch, we'll take an item 9 plus 7-4. And with that dump amount, we clearly are not uphill for this ullage leak. Stand by for your abort mode.
Flight GPC-1's a power fail. Work past GPC fail.
Atlantis for Brew, GPC-1 is a power fail. You can work the GPC fail procedure.
Take your inbound when you got it.
Flight DPS, precautionary is 4234 with the payloads, and Max is saying, I think we're going to need this for vent doors on the TAL.
Max?
That's correct, Flight. We need it for vent doors. Restream.
Flight booster.
Say again. Calling flight.
Flight Inco.
Go.
We're negative UHF. When able, select Alt Freak on 06.
Okay.
Atlantis, for Brew, you can select the Alt Freak on the overhead panel. Also, your precautionary MBAT 4234 with the payload.
Booster, what do you got?
Flight, we've evaluated. This is a TAL-sized ullage leak. Our recommendation is TAL.
What time do you predict the first engine?
7 plus 20.
Flight guidance.
Go.
Let's give the crew a NOCOM VI for TAL of 19K, and we can go ahead and get manual throttles now.
Boosters go with that.
What selection on manual throttles? 104?
Yeah,
104.
just take the manual throttles.
Okay.
Atlantis, this is a TAL-sized ullage leak. We can expect the first engine to fail at 7:20.
Break, flight booster.
Stand by.
The leak just got worse. We're going to have to go ecal here.
Guidance, you copy?
Guidance copies. I just need an predicted first engine out time.
You got a time?
It's still, call it the 6:30 flight.
6.5. Guidance, take a look at that. Max, do you need a restring for vent doors?
Yes, flight. I'll need
DPS, we're going to do that now. Are we in a good config?
Get him, man.
Break, PB the left now.
PB left engine.
PB left engine now. After the PB of the left engine, we'll take a restring now.
What they're already talking about right here, they've already given up on the making it to orbit. In fact, the engines, as you already heard, we've already cut them off. We've already jettisoned the external tank. The shuttle is now a great big, really fast glider, and they're no longer treating it like a spacecraft. Now they're talking like a great big glider. They're trying to get to the end of the runway. What are they talking now? Actual runway selection. What is the heading the pilot has to have, and what does weather look like? How low are the clouds? When is the pilot going to be able to see the runway? That's what our normal days look like in training. Why does shuttle flight look so easy whenever you see it? Because this is how we practice day in and day out. Why does Brian Lunny, why is he able to trust these guys when they make these calls? It's because Brian Lunny knows that we have trained these folks and that we can always trust what they tell us. And if they don't know the right answer, we know that they'll be the first ones to tell us, I'm not sure what's happening here. All right, so one of my few word charts. What are the takeaways from that from a leadership perspective from mission control? So recall I said our leadership model is technical truth, integrity, and courage. So from that last video, the types of things that we are always focusing on with our team, the things we train them in, the things we expect to hear them doing in real time when you're watching theirs. What is the data telling us? And can we trust what the data is telling us? Sometimes if we have a computer fail, that computer failure starts spitting out bad data. It tells us things are getting hot, voltages are going up, or that things have just broken when in fact they haven't. So what is technical truth, and what information do we have to know that we have technical truth? Especially on a day like that when we're about to give direction to the astronauts that could keep them from getting to orbit, or might keep them from getting to a runway, or could keep them from shutting down an engine on time because we think it's an instrumentation problem, when in fact we really are losing propellant in the external tank and we're about to lose the whole thing. What do we expect our folks? Know the difference, know what technical truth is. What we're seeing, does it fit with our experience base? And if it does it make sense that it fits, or should we be nervous? If it doesn't fit with our experience base, does that mean we're wrong? Does that mean this instance is wrong? And if so, why? And on the integrity side, what's going to kill the crew? Even on a good day, that first video where everything was working fine, what is the thing that's going to happen next that is most likely to kill the crew if we're not on top of it? And if some part of the spaceship fails, how does that change it? What does that then mean? The next thing is it's going to kill the crew, and how do we get out in front of that so that we're controlling it? We're not going to let it happen and then have to react. And how much of our decision making are we guessing? Because sometimes we have to make decisions and we don't have enough data. We do have to go on engineering judgment or intuition. But in fact, what is that? It's really educated guessing. Sometimes when we have to do that, we don't have a choice because some bad thing is going to happen. The tank's going to run out. We are going to either shut down the engine or not. The trick is knowing when you don't have enough data and that you're in a position of having to make judgments. Because if you know that, the rest of the team can weigh in. Somebody else might have data that would help you out. Somebody else might have been in an experience that would inform you and let you make a better decision. And then for courage, are we safe now? Do we have to take action? Or are we better off not doing anything? In some cases, we are better off leaving our hands off and not making a bad situation worse. But you better be right. Not making that call also takes courage, especially when you know that what you may be choosing is to continue to ride a leaking tank uphill that could lead to the shuttle blowing up. And then when do you have to take that action? When do you no longer have the option? Here's one of our internal, I guess, propaganda posters. I do not call it propaganda, but we're very big on this kind of imagery inside MOD. And MOD is the organization that I run that actually owns mission control. As you've already heard a couple of times, we own all mission planning, all astronaut training, all mission control for every manned space program that the nation has ever had. That timeline in the middle, by the way, depicts that pretty well. Each one of those little white ticks right on top of the timeline is an individual mission. We've had that responsibility from Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Soyuz, Skylab, Shuttle, all the satellites we've ever deployed from Shuttle, that we've repaired from Shuttle, the Shuttle Mir space station, which is this guy right here, and all of the missions we flew to that space station, and then the construction of the International Space Station, which started here in November '98 onward. Not just flying the shuttle up there to do it, but also the operation of the space station itself. In that time frame, we obviously are responsible for the technical work that we did in support of all that. We're responsible for the technical heritage. So our folks today that did the things you just heard them doing and making decisions on this type of leak, how do we respond? Those people can tell you, if we do it differently today than we did it 5 years ago, why? What data did we get? What tests did we run? What information did we get that made us change that? And how did we do it 10 years before that? How did we do it in Apollo? How did we do it in Gemini? And why did it change each time? Are we being deliberate about it? That is as much a responsibility as we have as every one of those flights that we flew in series. In addition to that, though, we are a relatively large corporate enterprise. At this time frame here, when we were still flying shuttles and flying space stations, so as late as late 2011, we were a $650 million per year enterprise with just over 3,000 employees to do all of that mission planning, training, and mission control stuff, and controlling and maintaining all of the facilities. So to put it in terms for folks that are used to managing things other than rocket scientists, in addition to those rocket scientists that you saw in the video, we're responsible for things like this facility where we have the simulators. So over here on the left side, that would be inside the space station simulator and the training room that controls the space station simulator. These kind of faded pictures here are the old shuttle simulators that we used to have occupying this floor space that we've now pulled out. And what you see instead are the early prototypes of the next generation spacecraft that we're already putting simulators in order to train new astronauts how to fly. Or this facility where we have the hi-fi mock-ups. So this is an entire space station mock-up, exactly the way it looks in flight, at least the modules. Way back here you see the last remaining shuttle mock-up. There used to be several more filling up this high bay. Same mock-up you see here from the other side of the building. We're already now starting to populate the building with trainers for commercial spacecraft and the next NASA spacecraft that we are developing and plan to start flying in about 2 years. The Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, which is a great big swimming pool, like you see right here, that great big swimming pool is about a $20 million a year operation. And in the bottom of that swimming pool is a full hi-fi mock-up of the entire space station. Until just recently, also I had a full mock-up of the space shuttle in there. And that's where our astronauts and our mission controllers plan spacewalks and then train astronauts to get them ready to then go into space and do those same spacewalks on the real space station. These pictures you see at the bottom, except for the fact that we have one of our astronauts in a spacesuit right here, all of the rest of that is non-space related work as we have started to use some of the extra capacity we have in this facility for other business in order to bring money in so that the agency doesn't have to spend $20 million a year for a facility that today we only need about half of. Unfortunately, we don't have a way of closing half of it, so we brought in new business to help make it cheaper for us. And then finally, the Mission Control Center. Big windowless building full of computers, full of networking, full of comm systems. This room here on the left, that was the shuttle space flight control room. This is the space station control room. And this room down here is a different room in the building, actually, that we originally flew space station from before it got larger on us. And that gives you an idea of how we are already modernizing the Mission Control Center. So it's going to look significantly different than you see it in the middle. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. What I really wanted to impress upon you, though, is MOD, Mission Control, is not just those people that you see in the pictures sitting at the console. It's all of that infrastructure and all of the budget associated to do that full spectrum of the man, plane, plan, train, fly job. Boy, say that long enough, you get that right. So, how did that set us up? In early 2010, this pretty much tells the story on what MOD or Mission Control had in its future. The top two pictures, we were flying Shuttle and we were flying Space Station, and we had already started to develop the operations for things like you see in the middle of the page with those astronauts hopping around on the moon. And the intent was, starting in a couple of years, we were going to start flying these rockets that we had in development, and we were going to fly this spacecraft, which is called the Orion spacecraft, to Space Station for resupply and to send new astronauts to the Space Station, while we got this rocket ready to then send this great big old thing to the moon, and we were going to send larger crews to stay for much longer than we ever had before to do lunar exploration and get us ready to send similar things like that to the planet Mars in the next decade. And in parallel to that, we were going to continue flying the space station and all of the logistics required to keep it in space. That was the plan. On February 1st, 2010, this was the plan. White House directed NASA to cancel all of that follow-on space exploration work, including the spacecraft that we would use to resupply and send astronauts to the space station. Instead, MOD's only job would be to fly the space station, and the NASA strategy would be, we'll open up a competition and we'll ask all comers to bid and build new rockets and new spacecraft, and we'll buy space on your spacecraft, and you send our stuff to space station, you send our stuff, our astronauts to the space station. Now, as a beam counter, the first and obvious impact to somebody like me and to my organization is, well, holy cow, half my business just went away. Half my budget, which also means half my people need to be laid off. So as a beam counter, right away, that sounds like something of concern. More importantly, though, to MOD is, without that launch and entry business, without the other things that are associated with short duration flight, like rapidly sending people up to go on spacewalks, building spacecraft in orbit, there are technical and cultural things that we would not be able to keep alive. So when and if the country decided, we really do want you to leave now and go to the moon or go back to Mars, we will have eliminated that capability. It doesn't exist anywhere else in this country except in NASA MOD or NASA Mission Control. Our biggest fear is, if we spend the next 5 to 10 years only flying station, we're going to spend 10 more years after that trying to reinvent what we have been honing for 50 years. That was our great challenge. Going back to the beam counter thing, though, when I said half my budget went away, a big chunk of that budget wasn't just for the new rockets and the new missions. A big piece of it, actually almost $100 million of that budget that went away, was fixed costs, where fixed costs means the care and feeding of that Mission Control Center, those simulators, those mock-ups. Sure, I'm leaving something off. Mission Control, I said, oh, Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. All the things that we needed to keep using to fly just the space station, half of the money went away. Just the upkeep on the facility itself, with no promise for the additional budget. So we had real beam counter challenges we had to rise to, as well as this huge fear that we were about to now fail the legacy and the responsibility we felt the nation had entrusted us with, and that is that plan, train, fly culture for going into space. Now, note at the top, as far back as 2006, we started working things inside the mission control world from a management perspective that contributed to our response in February of 2010. And we grouped those into two areas. Things that are reality, there's nothing we can do about it, we just have to figure out how to respond. And then the other things would be perceptions. So whether there are stakeholders, people outside of the agency, in some cases even our own workforce, where are perceptions going to get in the way and keep us from doing the right thing, presuming we know what the right thing is. And we started actively working on a series of those things in 2006. Those are things like I've already touched on. We had known since 2006 that the plan was to retire Shuttle and use the money from Shuttle to build new rockets, build the spacecraft that we would then send back to the moon. We had already committed we were going to do that with half the people and half the investment in mission control that we used to fly Shuttle. That all by itself was already a management challenge that we were wrestling with. Transitioning that Shuttle workforce over a several-year period from a team of flight controllers doing the things that we saw them doing to being a bunch of folks sitting around studying things, getting ready to do that again for new rockets, already was a management challenge for us. Transitioning our space station team from a team that was expert at getting the space station built to now being a team that maintains an aging vehicle that's finding new creative ways to fail on us, also already a management challenge. And then finally, the agency has already told us, we don't want you to fly our spaceships anymore. We're going to put this out for bid, and we're going to hire somebody that comes along at the lowest price, and we're going to have them do it. Now, as perceptions go, what was getting in our way? MOD, by the year 2000, and probably way before that, was known inside NASA circles as a not invented here organization, very resistant to change. And in fact, if you wanted to debate with us and change how we're flying in space, expect a battle. Some of that was for real reasons. You know, we have great respect, as you can already tell from the way I describe it, of that 7 million pounds of fire that squirts out of the back of the spaceship, or that 6,000 degree Fahrenheit fireball that's flowing around the outside of the spaceship during deorbit. And we are very careful to change how we manage that risk and not do something unintentionally. Now, on the less valid side, we let that permeate much of our management structure, so almost every decision was paralyzed, and it was very difficult for us to modernize. That was a valid perception of this organization. In fact, in 2010, after NASA made this policy, in order to back it up and why they needed to put us out of business, and not just us, but other NASA organizations that were responsible for other parts of the program, we were described by the NASA administrator, a former shuttle astronaut, as a not invented here organization that has thousands and thousands of mission controllers over there in mission control. So the boss, the guy that made the decision and gave the direction, already sees us and has told us publicly he sees us as not just not part of the solution, but as part of the problem. And unfortunately, some of what he was saying was true. Much of it was dated, however. And then worse, all those computers that we see in there, much of those things are old because we have been reluctant to invest money to replace them while we knew we were going to retire Shuttle. And as we kept maintaining these old computers, the cost to keep them running went up, up, and up. So very expensive, and we're resistant to change, and the boss thinks we're a great big old marching army. We felt challenged. Now, to our credit, in this time frame, going back to 2006, much of that we were already aware of before any of this crisis had started and before we were getting pressure from the outside. And about that time, we realized that our organization had spent about a decade with the deliberate stewardship of this leadership, deliberate stewardship of our management team atrophying, and that we were starting to erode the culture. And we started taking action that far back, including things like going out and benchmarking other industries and taking our own workforce to see where we can change things that we thought we were best in class in. And in fact, in some operations, we were way behind every other industry out there. And we had already started making progress on those. So that when this came along, and they canceled those programs, and then essentially promised us they were going to give the work to somebody else, our first focus then was on what is it that's important about this organization, and how do we leverage those strengths to make any next NASA space program successful. Not how can we keep X numbers more people on salary, how we can keep a certain amount of budget. It's what is unique about our organization that if we let it go away, we will have failed the nation. And we had already started making inroads, as I said, before 2010. But we hadn't done a good job telling that story up. So we pulled together some data like this. Now, the other thing I'll say is we had a little bit of luck. The deputy administrator of all of NASA came to Johnson Space Center for a visit for a variety of reasons, some of which was to give us the bad medicine and to let us have the opportunity to talk to her in person with why we were considered part of the problem and not the solution. And in that visit, I was able to show her the prototypes of some of those computers that I said we were already modernizing the control center with. And we were able to talk about budget charts like this, that I'm not going to go into great detail on, except to say way back in 1990, over here, our budget was just over $400 million. Now this is just for our contractors. There's a few things not in there. But in an apples to apples comparison, way out here in the 2010 time frame, we were flying Shuttle and flying Space Station, and we'd already started developing the operations for all of those new rockets going back to the moon for almost the same budget that back in 1990 we paid only to fly Shuttle. And those are for numbers that have not been normalized for inflation. Those are actual numbers. So 2010 dollars versus 1990 dollars. In fact, had we just adjusted the 1990 budget for inflation, we would have almost doubled it, close to $800 million, had we just kept doing business only for Shuttle. Had we kept doing business the way we always had, for us to support station, we would have had to have double that number, and yet this was our budget in that same time frame. Deputy Administrator was not aware of that. When we talked about workforce, this is the number of people in the whole MOD community. So this is not just Mission Control, but all of MOD. Back in 1990, only flying Shuttle, we had over 5,000 people in order to make that enterprise run. 10 years later, we were flying Shuttle and Space Station. We'd already come down about 30%. Fast forward 10 years after that, as we were getting ready to step up to that moon program, we were half the size that we were back when we were only flying Shuttle in 1990. The rest of this drop-off you see here, this part of the plan already, is what it would have cost us to step up and fly just the new rockets and Space Station. And when we lay in the new computer systems and bring those online in the next year or so, we're going to drop down to this number here, just over a fourth of the total number of people it took us to fly Shuttle all by itself. And at this price, we fly Space Station, we fly that new Orion spacecraft and the new NASA rocket, and we can fly another customer that, in parallel to all of this, we are off in the weeds trying to buy or trying to get new business. Throughout this discussion, we affected the perceptions of our stakeholders, these people that thought we were part of the problem and not part of the solution. We affected them so much that even though the intent was to put us out of business and turn that business over to a business, they allowed us to do what they originally told me I was not allowed to do. They gave me the latitude to go negotiate with these companies that were bidding on our work and put us in a position to be their mission control organization. So in 2010, this is what the future for MOD and mission control was supposed to be. Today, this is what our prospect is. NASA's still building this large rocket called the Space Launch System. We are still developing this spacecraft, the Orion spacecraft, which will first be tested in just under 2 years. There's a lot of political uncertainty about these because we have 2 more test flights after that flight, and then there's no mission. And in our world, if you don't have a mission, you probably aren't going to keep building because you're kind of wasting taxpayer money with a bridge to nowhere. So if that doesn't change, we're very concerned that this business, this ability to keep these things alive inside MOD will go away. What do we also have, though? As of last summer, I essentially have a contract with Boeing that if they get the final award for NASA and build that commercial spacecraft, and by the way, they are still in the competition. We've downsized to 2, or down selected to 2, and they're one of the 2 still competing. My organization will provide all planned, train, fly functions for that new vehicle flying on any of these commercial boosters that you can't really make out in this picture, which was specifically what the entire strategy was supposed to prevent happening when NASA came up with it. So I'll go back to technical truth, integrity, and courage. You know, what is our takeaway at the corporate level from the experience we've had in the last 3 years? That's different than what you saw in that video in Mission Control. And on the technical truth side, as you've already heard me say, what is it that we would be at risk of losing if we were only going to do space station work? And by losing it, we're failing the nation. We are going to unlearn something that only we know how to do. And then what work do we have to capture in order to keep those things alive? And on the integrity side, we had to have a lot of difficult questions about, do we need to keep all of these things alive? There were some parts of our organization that we have always had, that we had to make the choice. We're going to let this one go, and we're going to buy that service outside of our organization because it doesn't, in fact, fit as something that's unique to us. We can buy that kind of service anywhere. Like those computers, as a matter of fact. Our history has always been we have designed and built our own computer systems throughout our history. We're now putting Dell and HP PCs under the hood for a fraction of the cost, and they're significantly better than a government-designed and built computer. Go figure, huh? And then the last one on integrity, in what areas are we too resistant to change? In what areas do we need to modernize because it's the right thing to do? And on the courage side, how do we address people like the deputy administrator when she came to see us? How do we engage with her to try to fix her perceptions without it being interpreted as we're challenging policy? How do we do the same thing with our own workforce as we transition things down and in that our own workforce is concerned? If we do it, we're going to be lowering the technical bar. How do we engage them to do it without them thinking we've lost religion? And even better, how do I go out and engage with these industry players when I just was told I'm not allowed to go try to sell them services? So how do I engage with them in a way that is not counter to my direction and counter to policy, and yet contribute in a way that could make that industry player successful and the actual bottom line NASA policy successful. And then the last one is kind of a bean counter thing again. On those new mission control computers that I was talking about, when the deputy administrator came to see us, what we committed to is, you give us the budget for the next 2 years, make us whole on those fixed costs that you just took away from us. And at the end of us installing those computers, you can cut our budget in half and we'll step up and be able to perform. And that's exactly what we're doing. Create a certain amount of angst down in my organization when we agreed to a 50% cut for computer systems we had not yet put in place. So I'm back to sort of a propaganda picture. And, you know, the bottom line on my whole message on crisis leadership then, whether it's in mission control or whether it's at the corporate level, is you don't manage through a crisis. You don't end up with a legacy like our organizations by managing through those things. You lead. There's a risk of managing, and in a crisis, if you manage, you likely are going to do something safe, like chase that UHF problem instead of working the fact that you have a leak in your external tank that could lead to the back end of the shuttle blowing up. You lead. Where leading means that's the distinction you have to understand, is how to make that choice. You have to know your technical truths. What's going to kill your crew next? And then you don't get comfortable. What's going to kill the crew after that and after that? And if things don't go the way they think they're going to go, then how does that change everything we just decided? But don't shy away from making the hard decisions. Whether the hard decisions are, this part of our organization has become archaic, we now need to close it down and move on to something new, or we got to tell the crew to take this action right now, or we're going to give up making it to orbit. Because if you don't do it, it's likely going to be made for you anyway. Make the decision when you have a chance to influence it. And then only lead as much as required, and then get out of the way. In this corporate thing, actually many of my own guys give me personally a lot of credit for some of the successes that led to us being back in the game for flying that Orion spacecraft, or for us flying the Boeing commercial spacecraft. And in fact, my greatest contribution to our folks was on the very first day after the Constellation program was canceled. And the agency said, what we really want NASA to do is technology development and basic research and development. I told my guys, we are not going to do that. If this agency decides we no longer value human spaceflight, we're going to turn out the lights and we are going to go out of business. Those engineering things, those are things other parts of NASA do. That's not what we are the keepers of for the nation. So we're going to focus on how we keep alive those things that we are responsible for, and we're going to let everybody else chase those other things. That was my biggest contribution, and other things like it. And then my leaders are the ones that pulled together teams of people that then captured business, like the new business that we have on our plates. That is the key to leading in crisis. But some of the words you see at the bottom of this page, like you don't have to read them, but over on the lower left, we call those the foundations of mission operations. They're sort of our 7 commandments. And they actually, all but the last word, were added to the list by none other than Gene Kranz, the guy that Ed Harris portrayed in that movie. Each one of those, and each of the words on there, was precipitated by some problem we managed in flight, some crisis, predating Apollo 13, as a matter of fact, all things to remind our workforce and the management team of the stakes that are at play every time our people do what they do. And we have a long history of leaning on things like that in the technical work, in mission control. Now, I already mentioned we had lost sight of that in the decade before about 2006. Thankfully, in 2006, we became aware of that in the senior management ranks, and we started taking actions to change that. Where today, the most discussed thing at my level inside MOD is this very thing. Are we losing sight? Are we now forgetting the ability to know what's going to kill the crew next? Or what's going to kill the organization next? What's going to prevent us from being able to keep alive the thing that only exists inside our organization for the nation? And throughout that time frame, we didn't chuck those ideas. So as things started getting worse, Constellation got canceled, we bored in and paid much more attention on make sure we are chasing the things that are most important and most unique about us. We're not going after everything else. And we also didn't go off and invent those things. We actually have 5 leadership books that we make the core, that as we raise a rocket scientist and we see guys that we think that guy has the potential of growing up and being one of our most important senior managers in the future, then we expose them to ideas that don't come naturally to a rocket scientist. And we do that very thing because if we don't do it, we have a tendency of forgetting those things and just focus on being a rocket scientist, and we let our culture atrophy, and we absolutely don't want to do that. Now, rocket science and teaching our guys rocket science is hard. It's not the hardest part. All this leadership stuff that I keep talking about, that is the hardest thing that we do. Because, as I just said, rocket scientists and engineers don't do that on their own. It's not a natural act. It doesn't follow the laws of physics. It's not all just a bunch of ones and zeros like we get out of computers. And it's the most important thing we do in raising our leaders, making them ready to actually keep the team focused on the right things. Just like Brian Lunny in the back of the control room. And growing as a leader is making sure you understand your corporate values and being willing to evolve and stop being the rocket scientist, stop being the smart technical guy that got you to where you are, and now embrace driving the organization down the direction that makes the most sense for the nation. Now, I've already said a couple times we started in 2006. Had we waited until 2010 to start grappling with those ideas, I assure you, MOD today would only be flying space station. And my prediction is the agency would have already started seriously talking about putting us out of that work and contracting that out to the lowest bidder as well, for all of the same reasons that started our piece of what we see as a calamity in the first place. So the time to actually grapple with those things as a corporate leader is when you're not in crisis. Make sure you understand those things, and then managing through the crisis becomes significantly easier. You'll find that you can actually lead people to do things that they think are impossible. And with that, I'll take any questions you have, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much. We do have time for just a couple questions. Raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you.
I was interested in the SpaceX, first commercial vehicle up to the space station, and when I saw a look at what their mission control looked like versus what your guys did, I was thinking about the difference in culture, and I was wondering how, as the head of this, massive program, you integrate two different types of cultures to create a mission that's successful.
Well, I'll give you a couple of answers to that, but first, what did you see that was different between what you see in our mission control and what you see in theirs?
I saw a bunch of laptops, a bunch of people kind of in blue jeans, and there would be people coming in, and I mean, it just seemed like it was an intense thing, but much more of a kind of science project approach, as opposed to the kind of the monitors that I saw and the controls. So that's sort of.
I got you. All right, so we'll talk computers first. All of it's cosmetic, right? So they're using laptops. They're using brand spanking new computer systems because they hadn't been doing this before. So everything they've installed and started using is only a couple of years old. You look under the hood in mission control and our mission control in the next year, you'll see the same thing. And I don't say that to be defensive. I wish I had the luxury of being able to modernize 2 years ago or 5 years ago. That's the biggest thing that you're seeing is the difference there, but that's all cosmetic. The touch and feel, the data they're processing, the calls they're making, all very similar. What you may not have known is one of the fellows that's sitting on the front row right next to Elon Musk, the owner of that company, and one of their most senior advisors in the real-time operation is one of our experienced flight directors who was then a senior manager in the Space Shuttle program that they wisely hired away. Now, I don't say that because they needed us to show them how to do it, but there are some things that absolutely overlap, and they saw that. Our folks also were teamed up with them. So how do we learn to work and integrate them in or cooperate with them so that they can fly their spacecraft up the space station? When they started building their spacecraft, we had people from NASA MOD, Mission Control, teamed up comparing notes with them on how they were going to fly, how they were going to certify their procedures were right, that they knew how the software was going to behave. How did we do it? And when they got in close to space station, what data were we expecting to see before we would pass judgment that they were safe to keep flying closer and closer? And as our teams worked together, we realized, just like we do with our Russian partners on space station, or the Japanese partners on space station, or the Canadians, or the Europeans, that the cultures at the working level, when you're talking engineering and science, don't matter so much. Once you get past that initial distrust, you're just working science and engineering problems, and our folks all pretty much work the same way. Now, culturally, there's some things also that are cosmetic that are different about them. They're a little more new agey than we are. You know, most of my guys kind of dress like me. Some people at JSC criticize and say most of our guys look like me. Now, for the record, half of my flight directors are women, and I'll bet every one of them would not be happy about being told she looks like me. And even more importantly, I was saying just earlier today, half of my best, no, that's probably not true, 2/3 of my best flight directors are women, none of whom look like me. But they all tend to dress a little fancier. Our expectation is our flight directors, our flight controllers are going to be in front of a camera and talking to the press at any time, and we are still somewhat more hidebound, not from the outside, but our own preferences on what images we want to project. We absolutely want the public to know that our people are steely-eyed missile men, steely-eyed missile women. They are all about flying the spacecraft and protecting our astronauts. And some of that's reflected in things like the dress. That's not my way of saying SpaceX isn't interested in doing the right thing, by the way.
Back to the management. This sounds like a tough organization to work for. So I'm curious, what kind of turnover do you have? And the people who don't make it, you know, what happens?
We kill them. Actually, it's probably a bad time to make a joke like that now that I think about it. First, as far as it being a bad time, a bad organization or a tough organization to work for, that is a common view, even at the Johnson Space Center, from folks not inside MOD. From folks inside MOD, it is more like the feeling that you have being in the Marines or being in the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M, for any of you that know Aggies. You know, from the outside, you don't get us. From the inside, we can't explain it to you. The people inside feel like it's family and would sacrifice their life to stay on the job another year and to keep doing what we do. It is an unforgiving place. We are very hard on ourselves, and we're very hard on our team's performance. But our folks all know what the expectation is, and rarely do they not step up. And most of the time, if one of our folks makes a mistake, it's the person who made the mistake that makes it clear to all of us, and we all learn from it, and we don't run those folks off. The folks that we run off are the ones that don't get that. And so for those folks who can't actually make that transition and understand this bit about technical truth, integrity, and courage, that they are just nervous speaking out in front of the class, they're not able to do the math while the clock's ticking. And we have a lot of really smart people that, as design engineers, are better than our folks, but they can't do it while the clock's ticking. They can't do it while fire is squirting out of the back of the spaceship. For those folks, they would typically leave us and they'll go to one of the engineering organizations. But we don't kill them, but we also don't run them off.
Yes, sir.
Who's next?
How does the Orion spacecraft differ from other spacecrafts?
Mike Griffin, the former administrator of the agency, used to refer to it as an Apollo capsule on steroids, which is probably a pretty good way to picture it. It's significantly larger than the old Apollo capsule, can carry 6 or 7, and the number's gone up and down, but on the range of 6 or 7 astronauts when fully outfitted. And it also has solar arrays on it because it's intended to be in lunar orbit for months, if not go to Mars and back. So having batteries or having hydrogen oxygen fuel cells wouldn't make sense. But for the rest of it, for touch and feel, some of the systems are a little bit more modernized, but it's kind of a big old capsule like the Apollo capsule. But that's good because it's significantly cheaper to build, significantly fewer hazards associated with flying that than there is a much more complicated vehicle like a space shuttle. And since its mission is to get our people into orbit, into space station, or into orbit, into another vehicle on the way to the moon, that's all we needed.
What needs to be done to get the mission to the moon back on track?
Ask it again?
What needs to be done to get the mission to the moon back on track?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question. Actually, it's a simple question with a complicated answer. And I'll answer it this way. What we really need is a national referendum and a national discussion for the country and the White House to decide what they want us to do with the human space program, what direction to give NASA. NASA's in a position to do what we are told with the systems that we have. The White House needs to tell us, the nation needs to tell the White House what the populace wants. Do you want to go back to the moon? Do you want us to go to Mars? Do you want us to visit an asteroid? You decide that, and NASA can go make it happen. We know how to do any one of those things, but the decision has to be made above NASA. And then the budget commitment comes with it, and we're off and running.
Last question.
What do you think of doing an internationally supported humans to Mars mission?
I'll give you a couple answers. One, we have been flying the International Space Station now for 15 years, and it is a remarkable achievement. It is as remarkable in our international cooperation at the engineering level as it is a technical feat building this great big thing in low Earth orbit. It also, though, was a financial necessity. The Europeans kicked in funds. They threw in a laboratory. The Canadians provided an arm. The Japanese provided a laboratory. The Russians provided almost half of the core systems, with the Americans filling out all of the rest. So with that, though, all of those countries, all of those different space agencies contributed capital so that we didn't have to pay the whole price. It's generally accepted now that if humanity is going to go to Mars, for it to actually be affordable, no one country is going to do it. We're going to have to do it as an international cooperation so that we're sharing the burden. Technically, we know what needs to be done regardless. But my expectation is it will be some international consortium that will do it in order to spread the cost.
Paul, thank you so much for visiting the Clinton School. Thank you all for coming out this evening, and we will see you at the next one.